The air in the stuffy courtroom was thick with tension as the black woman, in a crisp navy suit, stood before the imposing figure of the white judge. His brow furrowed as he reviewed the citation in front of him, the sound of his gavel echoing through the chamber. Ms. Williams, the court finds you in violation of parking regulations. A fine of $150 is hereby imposed. This tone was stern, leaving no room for argument. Unflinching, the woman straightened her shoulders. Your Honor, I understand the citation, but I must respectfully disagree with the penalty. Her voice was measured, betraying none of the frustration simmering beneath the surface. The judge's eyes narrowed as he regarded the defiant woman before him. Do you have a valid reason for contesting this fine? Yes, Your Honor. I was parked in a designated loading zone while I conducted official business for the U.S. Attorney's Office. As a federal prosecutor, I am exempt from standard parking regulations while performing my duties. A hush fell over the courtroom as the judge's face grew pale. He quickly retrieved the case file, his fingers trembling slightly as he rifled through the pages. There, in bold letters, was the unmistakable designation: AUSA Alicia Williams, Assistant United States Attorney. The judge's face fell as he realized his grave error. Here before him stood not a defendant, but a federal prosecutor, a distinguished officer of the court. Beads of sweat began to form on his brow as he grappled with the implications of his hasty ruling. Alicia Williams watched impassively as the judge's composure crumbled. She had encountered this kind of prejudice before, but never from one so entrenched in the very system she had dedicated her career to upholding. Clearing his throat, the judge addressed her tentatively. Ms. Williams, I seem to have made a mistake here. Your credentials clearly indicate that you are an Assistant United States Attorney. He paused, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. I sincerely apologize for the confusion and the penalty I imposed. Alicia nodded, her expression unreadable. I appreciate your apology, Your Honor. However, I must insist that the fine be rescinded immediately. Her tone was firm, brooking no argument. The judge shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Yes, of course. The fine is hereby vacated. He averted his gaze, unable to meet Alicia's unwavering stare. An uneasy silence settled over the courtroom as Alicia considered her next move. She knew all too well the power dynamics at play. A black woman facing off against a white judge who had just made a grievous error. But she also recognized the opportunity to effect meaningful change. Your Honor, I believe this incident highlights a troubling pattern of implicit bias within our criminal justice system. Alicia's voice was steady, her words carefully chosen. As officers of the court, we have a responsibility to ensure fairness and equal treatment under the law. Clearly, there is work to be done. The judge shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face flushing with a mix of shame and defensiveness. Ms. Williams, I assure you, I strive for impartiality in all my rulings. This was simply an unfortunate mistake. Alicia raised a hand, silencing the judge. With respect, Your Honor, a mistake of this magnitude cannot be dismissed so easily. I propose that we use this as a learning opportunity, not just for yourself, but for all court personnel. The judge opened his mouth to respond, but Alicia pressed on. Implicit bias training could help us identify and mitigate the unconscious prejudices that too often creep into our decision-making. I'm confident that with your leadership, we can work to ensure this kind of error never happens again. The courtroom was silent as the judge contemplated Alicia's words. She could see the internal struggle playing out on his face, the desire to defend his reputation warring with a growing realization of the systemic issues she had so boldly laid bare. Finally, the judge nodded slowly. You make a compelling argument, Ms. Williams. I will take your proposal under advisement and discuss it with my colleagues. He paused, his gaze momentarily meeting Alicia's. And please accept my sincere apologies once more. Alicia inclined her head in acknowledgement. Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate your willingness to consider this matter further. With that, she turned and made her way out of the courtroom, the sound of her heels echoing in the hush. As Alicia stepped into the bright sunlight outside, she couldn't help but feel a sense of cautious optimism. Perhaps, just perhaps, this incident could be the catalyst for real change, not just in this courtroom, but in the justice system as a whole. Over the next several days, the incident in Judge Williamson's courtroom reverberated through the local legal community. Word of the federal prosecutor's public dressing down at the hands of the seasoned judge spread quickly, sparking outrage and heated discussions. Alicia Williams, meanwhile, had returned to her demanding caseload, but the memory of that confrontation continued to weigh on her. She knew all too well the challenges that Black attorneys faced in a criminal justice system rife with implicit biases and structural inequities. Yet, she was determined to use this incident as a catalyst for meaningful change. Reaching out to her colleagues, Alicia began to build a coalition of like-minded prosecutors, public defenders, and even a few sympathetic judges. Together, they strategized ways to address the implicit bias problem head-on, starting with Judge Williamson's courtroom. The group's first step was to formally request a meeting with the judge. To Alicia's surprise, Williamson agreed without hesitation. When they gathered in his chambers a week later, the atmosphere was tense but civil. "Thank you all for coming," Williamson began, his gaze sweeping across the assembled group. "I know why you're here, and I want you to know that I've given this matter a great deal of thought." Alicia nodded, her posture straight and her expression neutral. "We appreciate your willingness to engage on this issue, Your Honor. As we discussed in court, this incident highlights a troubling pattern of implicit bias that we believe needs to be addressed." Williamson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I understand your concerns, Ms. Williams, but I can assure you that I strive for impartiality in all my rulings. That was simply an unfortunate mistake." One of the public defenders, a young woman named Sarah Nguyen, spoke up. "With respect, Your Honor, a mistake of that magnitude cannot be brushed aside so easily. The implications are far-reaching, and they go beyond just this courtroom." Williamson furrowed his brow. "What do you mean, Ms. Nguyen?" Alicia intervened, her tone measured. "Your Honor, the problem of implicit bias is pervasive throughout our criminal justice system. We've seen it manifest in disparities in charging decisions, bail amounts, sentencing lengths, and more. And the impact falls disproportionately on communities of color." The judge's expression darkened. "Are you suggesting that I'm somehow complicit in perpetuating these inequities?" "Not at all, Your Honor," Alicia quickly replied. "We're merely asking you to acknowledge the systemic issues at play and to work with us towards a solution." Williamson's jaw tightened, but after a moment, he sighed heavily. "Very well. What do you propose?" Alicia and her colleagues had come prepared. They presented a detailed plan for implementing mandatory implicit bias training for all court personnel, including judges, prosecutors, public defenders, and even court staff. The training would cover topics ranging from recognizing unconscious prejudices to developing strategies for mitigating their impact on decision-making. As the group laid out their proposal, Williamson listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. When they had finished, he leaned back in his chair, contemplating their words. "This is a significant undertaking," he mused, "and it will require buy-in from the entire judiciary, not just this courthouse." Alicia nodded. "We understand, Your Honor, but we believe this is a critical first step in addressing the larger problem, and we're willing to work with you to spearhead this initiative." Williamson's gaze shifted between the faces of the assembled group, a hint of resignation in his expression. "Very well. I'll take this proposal to the Judicial Conduct Commission and see what can be done." A collective sense of relief swept through the room, but Alicia knew this was just the beginning. Changing long-entrenched biases and systemic inequities would be an uphill battle, fraught with resistance and skepticism. As the meeting drew to a close, Williamson fixed Alicia with a thoughtful look. "Ms. Williams, I want to thank you for bringing this issue to my attention. It's clear that you have a deep commitment to justice, and I admire your tenacity." Alicia inclined her head. "Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate your willingness to engage on this matter. We all have a responsibility to ensure that the scales of justice are balanced for everyone who comes before this court." Williamson nodded slowly. "Indeed. I'll be in touch with the progress on the training proposal. Good day to you all. As Alicia and the others filed out of the judge's chambers, she couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. This was just the first step, but it was a significant one. If they could succeed in implementing meaningful implicit bias training, it could pave the way for broader reforms within the criminal justice system. Alicia knew the road ahead would be arduous, but she was more determined than ever to be a catalyst for change. The stakes were too high, and the consequences of inaction too dire to do anything less. In the weeks that followed, the implicit bias training proposal began to gain traction across the local legal community. Judge Williamson had dutifully taken the plan to the Judicial Conduct Commission, and word quickly spread of his efforts to address the systemic issues highlighted by the incident with Alicia Williams. While some of Williamson's colleagues initially balked at the idea, Alicia and her team worked tirelessly to build support. They hosted informational sessions, circulated research studies, and even enlisted the help of respected scholars and legal experts to lend credibility to their cause. The turning point came when a highly regarded federal judge, known for her fairness and commitment to justice, publicly endorsed the training program. Her endorsement carried significant weight, and soon, judges across the district were signaling their willingness to participate. As the momentum built, Alicia and her colleagues shifted their focus to the logistics of the training. They collaborated with a team of diversity and inclusion consultants to develop a comprehensive curriculum that would challenge participants to confront their own biases and develop practical strategies for mitigating their impact. The training sessions were meticulously planned, covering everything from the science of implicit bias to the historical context of racial inequities in the criminal justice system. Particular emphasis was placed on real-world case studies and interactive exercises designed to foster self-reflection and empathy. When the first round of training began, the atmosphere in the courthouse was palpable. Judges, prosecutors, and public defenders alike filed into the conference room, some with a sense of trepidation, others with a cautious openness to the process. Alicia, along with a diverse team of facilitators, led the sessions with a combination of expertise and compassion. They acknowledged the discomfort that often accompanied discussions of bias and privilege, but they also emphasized the critical importance of this work. As the training progressed, a remarkable transformation began to take shape. Participants who had initially approached the topic with defensiveness or skepticism began to open up, sharing their personal experiences and grappling with the ways in which their own unconscious biases had influenced their decision-making. One by one, the attendees shared their stories, their voices laced with a mix of shame, regret, and a newfound determination to do better. Alicia listened intently, her heart swelling with a sense of cautious optimism. By the end of the training, the atmosphere in the room had shifted dramatically. Gone was the tension and unease, replaced by a palpable sense of solidarity and a shared commitment to enacting meaningful change. As the participants filed out, Alicia caught sight of Judge Williamson. Their eyes met, and in that moment, she saw a glimmer of understanding, a tacit acknowledgement of the gravity of the challenge they had just begun to confront. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects of the training became increasingly visible. Judges began to scrutinize their rulings more closely, questioning the implicit assumptions that had previously gone unexamined. Prosecutors and public defenders, too, found themselves reevaluating their charging decisions and plea bargaining strategies. Alicia and her team continued to monitor the progress, providing ongoing support and guidance. They regularly convened follow-up sessions where participants could share their successes, their struggles, and their insights. The goal was to foster a culture of accountability and continuous improvement, one that would outlast the initial training. As the months passed, the data began to tell a compelling story. Bail amounts for defendants of color decreased, mirroring a similar trend in sentencing lengths. Prosecutors reported a more nuanced approach to charging decisions, with a greater emphasis on rehabilitation and restorative justice. The transformation, while gradual, was undeniable, and at the center of it all was Alicia Williams, a federal prosecutor whose poise and determination in the face of adversity had ignited a movement for change. Word of the program's success soon spread, and other jurisdictions began reaching out, eager to learn from Alicia's team and implement similar initiatives in their own courtrooms. It was a testament to the power of one individual's willingness to challenge the status quo and the transformative impact that could result. As Alicia reflected on the journey, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and purpose. The road ahead was still long, the challenges formidable, but she knew that with persistence and a steadfast commitment to justice, real change was possible. The impact of the implicit bias training program orchestrated by Alicia Williams and her colleagues rippled far beyond the local courthouse. As word of its success spread, jurisdictions across the country began reaching out, eager to replicate the model in their own legal systems. Alicia found herself inundated with requests for consultations, speaking engagements, and collaborative partnerships. She embraced the opportunity, recognizing that this was her chance to catalyze change on a larger scale. Traveling tirelessly, Alicia met with judges, prosecutors, and public defenders, sharing the insights and strategies that had proven effective in her own community. She emphasized the importance of tailoring the training to the unique needs and contexts of each jurisdiction, stressing that a one-size-fits-all approach would be unlikely to yield the desired results. As Alicia's profile continued to rise, she began to receive offers from prestigious law schools and think tanks, all vying for her expertise and guidance. But Alicia remained steadfast in her commitment to the front lines, determined to ensure that the momentum she had helped build would not be lost. One particularly significant milestone came when Alicia was invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee on the issue of bias in the criminal justice system. Seated alongside esteemed legal scholars and policy experts, Alicia delivered a compelling and impassioned address, outlining the systemic challenges she had witnessed firsthand and the tangible solutions that had proven effective. Her testimony struck a nerve, resonating with lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. In the aftermath, several members of Congress reached out to Alicia, seeking her counsel as they began to draft legislation aimed at addressing implicit bias and promoting greater equity within the justice system. Alicia embraced the opportunity, recognizing that this was a chance to enact change on a national scale. She worked tirelessly, collaborating with legislators, providing feedback on draft bills, and advocating for the inclusion of robust training and accountability measures. As the legislative process unfolded, Alicia continued to maintain her responsibilities as a federal prosecutor, juggling her extensive travel schedule and public engagements with the demands of her day-to-day caseload. The strain was palpable, but her determination never wavered. One evening, as Alicia was reviewing a case file in her dimly lit office, she received an unexpected phone call. It was Judge Williamson, the same jurist who had initially fined her in his courtroom. "Ms. Williams," he began, his voice tinged with a hint of hesitation, "I wanted to personally thank you for your continued efforts in this fight against implicit bias. The changes we've seen in our own courthouse have been nothing short of remarkable." Alicia leaned back in her chair, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Thank you, Your Honor. It's been a collaborative effort, but I'm grateful to have had your support from the very beginning." Williamson cleared his throat. "Yes, well, I'll admit that I was resistant at first, but you've opened my eyes to the systemic nature of this problem, and I'm committed to being a part of the solution." "I'm glad to hear that, Your Honor," Alicia replied. "It's going to take all of us working together to make lasting change." "Indeed," Williamson agreed, "and that's why I'm calling. I wanted to let you know that I've been in touch with some of my colleagues on the Judicial Conduct Commission. We're exploring the possibility of making the implicit bias training you developed a mandatory requirement for all judges in our jurisdiction." Alicia's eyes widened, her heart racing. That's incredible news, Your Honor. I can't tell you how much that means to me, to all of us who have been fighting for this." "Well, you deserve the credit, Ms. Williams," Williamson said. "Your courage and tenacity have been an inspiration. This is just the beginning, but I believe we're on the right track." As Alicia ended the call, she felt a surge of exhilaration. The work was far from over, but this development represented a major milestone. If the Judicial Conduct Commission followed through on Williamson's proposal, it would send a powerful message across the legal community, solidifying the importance of addressing implicit bias as a fundamental aspect of judicial ethics and professional conduct. Alicia knew that the road ahead would still be long and arduous, but she was more determined than ever to see this mission through. The stakes were too high, the consequences of inaction too dire, to do anything less. With a renewed sense of purpose, Alicia turned her attention back to the case file, her mind racing with strategies and ideas. She was one person, but she knew that together, with a network of allies and advocates, they could transform the very foundations of the criminal justice system. It was a daunting challenge, but Alicia was ready to meet it head-on. She had come too far to back down now. Alicia's efforts to address implicit bias in the criminal justice system continued to gain momentum. The Judicial Conduct Commission approved the mandatory training program proposed by Judge Williamson, and within a matter of months, it was being implemented across the district's courtrooms. The impact was immediate and profound. Judges began scrutinizing their rulings more closely, questioning the assumptions that had previously gone unexamined. Bail amounts and sentencing lengths for defendants of color decreased significantly, mirroring the trends seen in Alicia's local courthouse. As the program's success spread, Alicia found herself in high demand. She was invited to speak at legal conferences, conduct training sessions for prosecutors and public defenders, and advise policymakers on legislative initiatives aimed at addressing systemic bias. Through it all, Alicia remained steadfast in her commitment to the front lines. She continued to carry a full caseload as a federal prosecutor, leveraging her experience and expertise to secure convictions while also advocating for more equitable outcomes. One case in particular stood out as a testament to Alicia's unwavering dedication. A young black man, accused of a nonviolent drug offense, had been facing a lengthy prison sentence. Alicia, recognizing the disproportionate impact of such charges on communities of color, fought tirelessly to have the case diverted to a pretrial intervention program. Against the odds, Alicia's efforts paid off. The judge, having undergone the implicit bias training, was receptive to her arguments and agreed to the alternative sentencing. The young man was able to avoid incarceration, instead receiving counseling and community service, a punishment better suited to the nature of his offense. As word of the case spread, Alicia found herself the subject of both praise and criticism. Some hailed her as a champion of justice, while others accused her of undermining the rule of law. But Alicia remained undaunted, convinced that true justice required a nuanced, compassionate approach that addressed the root causes of criminal behavior. Buoyed by the success of the training program and the growing momentum of the movement, Alicia turned her attention to the next challenge: addressing the disparities in charging decisions made by prosecutors. She reached out to her colleagues, both in her own office and across the country, urging them to reevaluate their practices and consider the impact of their choices. The response was mixed, with some prosecutors eager to embrace change and others stubbornly resistant. Undeterred, Alicia organized a national summit, bringing together prosecutors, defense attorneys, and criminal justice reform advocates to share best practices and develop strategies for promoting more equitable charging decisions. The event was a resounding success, generating a flurry of media attention and sparking a nationwide conversation about the role of prosecutors in perpetuating systemic bias. Alicia's message was clear. Prosecutors had a moral and ethical obligation to wield their power responsibly, prioritizing rehabilitation and restorative justice over harsh punishments. As Alicia's national profile continued to rise, she began to receive offers from prestigious law schools and think tanks, all vying for her expertise and guidance. But Alicia remained steadfast in her commitment to the front lines, determined to ensure that the momentum she had helped build would not be lost. One particularly significant opportunity came when Alicia was invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee on the issue of bias in the criminal justice system. Seated alongside esteemed legal scholars and policy experts, Alicia delivered a compelling and impassioned address outlining the systemic challenges she had witnessed firsthand and the tangible solutions that had proven effective. Her testimony struck a nerve, resonating with lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. In the aftermath, several members of Congress reached out to Alicia, seeking her counsel as they began to draft legislation aimed at addressing implicit bias and promoting greater equity within the justice system. Alicia embraced the opportunity, recognizing that this was a chance to enact change on a national scale. She worked tirelessly, collaborating with legislators, providing feedback on draft bills, and advocating for the inclusion of robust training and accountability measures. As the legislative process unfolded, Alicia continued to maintain her responsibilities as a federal prosecutor, juggling her extensive travel schedule and public engagements with the demands of her day-to-day caseload. The strain was palpable, but her determination never wavered. Alicia's impact continued to reverberate nationwide as she worked tirelessly to advance the cause of criminal justice reform. Her testimony before Congress had been a watershed moment, galvanizing lawmakers to take meaningful action. The legislative process was arduous, with fierce debates and compromise negotiations, but Alicia remained steadfast in her advocacy. She worked closely with congressional staff, providing expert guidance and feedback on various bills aimed at addressing implicit bias in the justice system. One of the key initiatives Alicia championed was the establishment of a national task force to study the problem and develop comprehensive, evidence-based solutions. The task force would bring together a diverse group of stakeholders, including judges, prosecutors, public defenders, law enforcement officials, and community representatives. Alicia's relentless efforts paid off when the legislation passed both chambers of Congress with bipartisan support. The president, recognizing the gravity of the issue, quickly signed it into law, paving the way for the creation of the National Task Force on Criminal Justice Equity. As the task force began its work, Alicia was tapped to serve as a core member, leveraging her expertise and on-the-ground experience to shape the group's findings and recommendations. She worked closely with her colleagues, analyzing data, reviewing best practices, and engaging in robust discussions on the most effective strategies for reform. The task force's final report, which was released to widespread acclaim, called for sweeping changes to the criminal justice system. Among the key recommendations were mandatory implicit bias training for all court personnel, including judges, prosecutors, public defenders, and law enforcement officers. The implementation of pretrial diversion programs and restorative justice initiatives to address nonviolent offenses. The establishment of independent oversight boards to monitor charging decisions and sentencing disparities. Increased funding for community-based mental health and addiction treatment resources. Alicia's contributions to the task force were widely recognized, and she found herself in even greater demand as a speaker and consultant. She continued to juggle her federal prosecutor duties with a packed schedule of training sessions, policy briefings, and media appearances. Despite the relentless pace, Alicia remained unwavering in her commitment to the cause. She understood that true change would not come easily and that the road ahead would be long and arduous, but she was more determined than ever to see it through, driven by a deep-seated belief in the power of justice to transform lives and communities. As the task force's recommendations began to be implemented across the country, Alicia witnessed the tangible impacts of her efforts. Bail amounts and sentencing lengths for defendants of color decreased, mirroring the trends she had observed in her local courthouse. Prosecutors increasingly adopted a more nuanced, rehabilitation-focused approach to charging decisions. The broader criminal justice system was undergoing a profound shift, and Alicia was at the forefront of it all. Her name became synonymous with the fight for equity and fairness, and she found herself the subject of numerous awards, accolades, and media profiles. But Alicia remained humble and grounded, never forgetting the personal experiences that had first inspired her to take on this daunting challenge. She continued to seek out opportunities to mentor young lawyers, particularly those from underrepresented backgrounds, encouraging them to use their legal expertise to drive meaningful change. As Alicia's influence and reputation grew, she was approached with tempting offers from prestigious law firms and think tanks, all vying for her expertise and guidance. But she steadfastly declined, determined to remain in the trenches, where she could continue to make a tangible difference in the lives of those impacted by the criminal justice system. It was a grueling and relentless battle, but Alicia knew that the stakes were too high to back down. She had come too far, and the progress she had helped catalyze was too important to risk squandering. With unwavering determination, she forged ahead, her sights set firmly on a future where the scales of justice would be balanced for all. In the years following the landmark legislation and the work of the National Task Force on Criminal Justice Equity, Alicia Williams' impact continued to reverberate across the country. The reforms she had championed had transformed the criminal justice system, leading to more equitable outcomes for defendants of color and a greater emphasis on rehabilitation and restorative justice. Alicia remained at the forefront of this movement, using her platform to advocate for further progress. She testified before congressional committees, advised state and local governments on policy implementation, and collaborated with legal scholars to advance the field of study on implicit bias and its manifestations within the justice system. Her tireless efforts did not go unnoticed. Alicia was the recipient of numerous accolades, including the prestigious Thurgood Marshall Award from the American Bar Association and the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award. These honors served to amplify her message and inspire a new generation of lawyers and activists to take up the mantle of reform. But Alicia's true legacy lay not in the awards or the media attention, but in the real-world impact of the changes she had helped to catalyze. In courtrooms across the country, judges were now more attuned to the role of implicit bias in their decision-making, leading to a more equitable application of the law. Prosecutors, too, had embraced a more nuanced and compassionate approach to charging decisions, increasingly opting for diversion programs and restorative justice initiatives. The data told a compelling story. Racial disparities in bail amounts, sentencing lengths, and incarceration rates had all decreased significantly, indicating a tangible shift in the culture and practices of the criminal justice system. For Alicia, the most rewarding aspect of this transformation was the human stories behind the numbers, the lives that have been changed, the communities that have been empowered, and the cycles of incarceration that have been broken. She often reflected on the young man she had helped divert from a lengthy prison sentence, the one whose life had been set on a new, more hopeful trajectory. That case had not only vindicated her approach, but had also fueled her determination to keep pushing for more equitable outcomes. As Alicia's reputation and influence continued to grow, she found herself increasingly in demand as a speaker and consultant. Invitations poured in from law schools, think tanks, and professional organizations, all eager to tap into her expertise and insights. But Alicia remained steadfast in her commitment to the front lines, determined to ensure that the momentum she had helped build would not be lost. She continued to carry a full caseload as a federal prosecutor, leveraging her experience and expertise to secure convictions while also advocating for more compassionate and rehabilitative approaches. One day, as Alicia was reviewing a case file in her office, she received a call from Judge Williamson, the same jurist who had initially fined her in his courtroom all those years ago. "Alicia," he said, his voice tinged with a hint of emotion, "I wanted to thank you once again for your tireless work in this fight. The changes we've seen in our justice system are nothing short of remarkable." Alicia smiled, a sense of pride and accomplishment swelling within her. "I'm grateful for your support, Your Honor. This has truly been a collaborative effort, and I'm honored to have been a part of it." Williamson cleared his throat. "Yes, well, I must admit that I was quite skeptical at first. But you've proven that with determination and a willingness to confront our own biases, we can create a more equitable and just system." Alicia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's been a long and arduous journey, but I truly believe that we're just scratching the surface of what's possible. There's still so much more work to be done." "I couldn't agree more," Williamson replied, "and that's why I'm calling. I wanted to let you know that I'm retiring from the bench, and I'd like you to consider taking my place." Alicia's eyes widened in surprise. "Your Honor, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of commitment. My work as a prosecutor is still so important to me." Williamson chuckled. "I understand, Alicia, but I believe your voice and your vision are precisely what we need on the bench right now. You have the chance to continue shaping the very system you fought so hard to reform." Alicia fell silent, her mind racing as she considered the implications of Williamson's offer. It was a daunting prospect, but one that also filled her with a sense of purpose and possibility. "Give it some thought," Alicia Williamson said. "The position is yours if you want it. I'll be in touch." As Alicia ended the call, she couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement and trepidation. The road ahead would be challenging, but she knew that she was more than ready to take on this new role, to be a catalyst for change from the bench, to ensure that the progress she had fought for would continue to endure and expand. With a deep breath, Alicia turned her attention back to the case file, her resolve steeled by the knowledge that her work was far from over. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, one in which she would have the opportunity to transform the very foundations of the criminal justice system.